I sit here and I look at how far our industry has come over the last 10 or 15 years, right? We've come a long way, a lot of change. And when you look back at how we started, identity access management, right? Access, we're given access to probably the top 10 or 15 applications. It was about efficiencies, right? I think many of you will nod your heads and say, yeah, we were there. IGA soon became the point of focus. And with IGA, it was really more about productivity, right? And then when we got into a little bit further down the road, IGA was really more about compliance around lifecycle management. But we were never brought into the conversation around security, right? And so today, fast forward to 2020, right? And you know what happened in 2020, right? Everything started to change, and it was more about not just efficiency, not just productivity, right? But it became about identity security. And we had just renamed our platform Identity Security probably, I don't know, a month prior to the big fallout on March 13th, right? And what happened around business, we used to call it, we went through this process where you had buckets. The customers were reprioritizing all of their work around bucket 1 and bucket 2, right? And it was all about business essential, right? Business essential. And that basically became our battle cry, right? Anything that was business essential was people needed to run the business and to keep the lights on. And that's really what identity security was really evolved on. Depends on 3 things today. It's no longer efficiency and productivity, but most importantly, efficiency, productivity, and security. Now, we used to consider that as long as you protected the enterprise from the outside in, you were secure, right? And while the outside in is still very, very important to securing the enterprise, you probably know this, 80% of the breaches actually come from the inside out today. Okay? Couple that with what is already a complex, typical modern enterprise, and you can quickly see how the CIOs and CISOs in the room today and what they're up against. Keeping up with the influx of technologies hitting your ecosystem on a regular basis, ensuring everyone and everything has clearly identified and secured access to those technologies, preventing slowdowns in the business from slowing things down or locking things up too much, but also avoiding giving people too much access, right? Trying to increase productivity. And that's a risk. And it's a lot. And all of that cannot be clearly managed or contained by just the human capacity alone. So I thought what we do, we always talk about the complexity and the challenges. In my role, I get to see a lot of these numbers. And so I thought maybe we'd spend a minute and look at some of these numbers and some of the complexities. And knowing full well, the numbers we're going to talk about, they're big. And they're probably worst case. But you can't solve for the norm if you're not solving for the whole picture, the different combinations. So you've heard the old adage, a picture paints 1,000 words. Well, there's an old saying that numbers don't lie. So we're going to take some numbers here, play with some scenarios, and really help to kind of paint this picture. So if we can, we're going to use a large enterprise. These numbers are not fictitious. They come from our customer base, but they're big, right? And look, we can have some fun. I challenge you to get your phones out and work these numbers. I saw a couple of you earlier with your calculator strapped to your belt. Grab those, right? But let's start with an enterprise that has 100,000 identities, right? Not 100,000 employees, but 100,000 identities. And let's say that enterprise has 2,000 applications. When I looked at the data, I said, 2,000, that's a lot. We've got companies with 3, 4, 5 times that many applications. It's really not all that uncommon for a large enterprise. But then you start looking at, if you're doing the math, right? 100,000 times 2,000, and then we start looking at entitlements, right? And level of access varies. Those entitlements to applications perhaps can number into the hundreds, right? Even the thousands. And when I talk about an entitlement, we're not talking about millennials, right? We're talking about application entitlements, right? And so we're talking about every app you get access to, and then what do you get to do within it? I get to write a report, I have a dashboard, maybe I can do a transaction, right? But it's not just access to the app. What about the entitlements for the data, right? It's multifaceted. Can they access all the data, right? Just a few elements of data? Do they have read-only access, full edit rights? I mean, you very quickly can get to numbers of 100,000 data entitlements, right? So I did the math. These guys, the first scenario without the data, it's like 20 trillion different combinations. The last one, I worked a week to be able to say quadrillion, all right? It's 2 quadrillion. Look, nobody's going to do 2 quadrillion. But the combinations are there, and it shows and highlights the complexity of the problem we're trying to solve, right? And it's a big number. And I think the takeaway that we'd like you to walk away with is that this is really complex, and if you're trying to secure your enterprise, you're just not going to do it with the traditional hands on the keyboard. And if you are, look, I started down this path with our team to say, how many people go into 2 quadrillion, right? And they never responded. So it's a lot, right? But let's just not take a large enterprise. We actually ran some numbers on smaller enterprise. And you can do the math. I'm not going to go through it, but it's 2,500 identities. Right? We have a ton of customers that have 2,500 identities, 400 apps, 50 entitlements per app, 25 data entitlements. Do the math. Way smaller, still big. Still not something you want to fool around with hands on the keyboard, right? And in each of these examples, we're not factoring in any of the JML, the joiner, the mover, the lever, right? We're not factoring any of the constant threats that are coming in daily, right? And look, at the end of the day, this helps explain why many of our customers today have a very difficult time securing over 70% of their identities, because it's really hard, and they don't have the infrastructure in place to be able to go do this. Now, based on all of this, it becomes very easy to see how quickly the complexity really starts to pile up. And the question for you all is, you tell me, how do you keep up with that? If you're the CIO or the CISO that's on the hook for keeping up with it, how do you do it? I have the opportunity to speak with many customers, many of our prospects, our partners, and the fact of the matter is this: the numbers we're facing today, they're just simply daunting. But at the end of the day, it's the reality we're in. And it's simply impossible to manage any of this at speed, at scale, with accuracy, without the aid of automation. Without the scale of an identity solution that can keep pace. That's what we're collectively up against today. Now, we're going to share a number of things with you today, as Wendy said. And one of the things you're interested in is what we're doing about it. What are we doing about it here at SailPoint? How are we thinking about addressing your identity security challenge, the things that I just spoke of? And importantly, I think you've got to have a moment and ask yourself, what are you doing about it? Right? How are you tracking against the threats? How are you tracking against your peers in the industry? All of you have a strategy by now. How are you executing against your strategy? We talk with our CISOs often, advisory boards, and they struggle to understand 3 things, pretty common, right? How do you properly gauge maturity and of your and convey the risk, right? How do you do that? How do you properly gauge the maturity of your enterprise identity strategy and your ability to execute it, as I was saying? And lastly, how do you communicate upwards to the C-suite and now the board, right, in a professional, methodical, and data-driven way? And that is really the genesis behind our 2nd annual Horizons of Identity report that we're announcing here today, right? Now, I don't know how many of you, I probably can't even see if I said show of hands, but last year, we announced the first Horizons of Identity report. We partnered with our friends at McKinsey, and we put out a state of identity security across the world, right? It was a thoughtful, detailed survey to plot the 5 horizons in identity, ranging from the least to the most mature on approach and adoption. This year, the next generation of this report, we go down a layer deeper, right? And again, we're partnering with McKinsey, and in collaboration with our friends at Accenture. And really, what we're reporting is, what does that foundation look like to help companies move along their journey at a much faster pace. We provide a path with benchmarking details, industry access, and I think when you look at it, it's another level deeper. It's got great data content, and we think it's going to help our customers and prospects alike really assessing where they're at, and equally as important, how do I get to where I need to go faster, right? So to help me dig a little deeper into this year's report findings, hugely fortunate enough to have our friend and partner, Simon Gooch from Accenture here, and he's going to come out and we're going to talk a little bit about this. Simon, come on out.
Yeah, it's fine. Is it the person answering or asking gets to sit down? I don't know.
Thank you, guys. Well, welcome. You made about a 10-hour airplane ride to get here, right?
I did, yep.
And he and I get to have the pleasure of doing this again next week in London, and I'm going to return the favor. So, you know what I thought? We got some questions here that we want to share with the audience, but I thought maybe before we started out, we could take a minute and first I'd say the relationship we have with Accenture's unique. They're one of our biggest, and forgive me for saying, but complex customers we have, and at the same time, they're one of our largest partners. We do a significant amount of business together, delivering these kind of solutions to our joint customer base. So in this scenario, Simon kind of finds himself with his feet in both ponds, and I thought maybe we just start off for a minute and you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself and Accenture and this very important project you're working on.
Appreciate that. I got a curveball question for you before we start then. So I was just pondering, because it's a fireside chat, and I was wondering, well, A, I can't see a fire.
No.
And the appropriateness of a fireside chat being the first thing in the morning? Is there an equivalent? Is that a US thing? Am I missing something?
It is, and we're going to have a fire, but it's a fire code issue. So
Gotcha.
We just got to sit here on these nice chairs.
Yeah, so well, let me, so you've set me a challenge actually as you did your introduction, I noticed, because I mean, I normally describe my role, it's pretty straightforward. I'm responsible for securing all the core tech that runs the Accenture business. It's easy, right? I mean, that's a pretty simple statement, sounds pretty easy. But actually, you threw a whole load of data points into your initial kind of introduction.
Did I not prep you for that?
No. So I now feel the need to kind of just give some context to that really simple statement. So, that's securing the core tech that runs the Accenture business. I mean, if you think about the Accenture business, just for context, that's 800,000, give or take, people, 5,500 applications, over 2 million identities. We are 99% in the cloud, about 30% cloud native or SaaS service consumption. So whether it's, we're moving to SAP cloud, whether it's ServiceNow, whether it's Workday, and soon to be Identity Now, obviously, as well. We are, I think, you mentioned it, but by all, I think, measures, a complex and large organization. My responsibility is making sure all of that tech is secure, whether it's the network, whether it's the endpoint, whether it's those applications. And then more and more, and I own this end-to-end, whether it's the identity fabric and services. So the thing that are the beating heart, I think, of everything we now do in terms of tech enablement, or more and more also, I'm responsible for making sure we appropriately enable and secure our data fabric as well. So, I mean, that's a snapshot of my responsibility.
Yeah. I think you're being pretty humble. I know firsthand that's a pretty big project or program, right, in the company. And in fact, the matter, I think if you talk to Grady and Ben and the team, they're challenging us pretty good, right? And this is how you get better. You get partners and customers that challenge you and push you, and I think these are the things that drive this great product to be even greater, and a lot of the innovation. So, look, appreciate you being here. I got a couple of questions for you, all right?
Shoot.
I think I talked earlier about just the pace of change in the industry, and probably the last 4 or 5 years, what we went through with the pandemic and that, and the whole work from home phenomena. How do you see this all evolving? And when you start talking about the industry trends, the cyber threat landscape, you're dealing with all of that at a huge scale, right? How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I think you've said it and I've said it now. So there's this increasing complexity. So just the complexity of the ecosystem that we're operating is becoming one of the biggest challenges. Just if you're like Accenture and you're a predominantly cloud-first, cloud-native organization, you've got a challenge to understand, how are all the services and systems plumbed together? Because I don't own that anymore. My data could reside anywhere and everywhere. So it's that complexity of the ecosystem, I think, presents one of the biggest challenges. It's a challenge fundamentally then because, you don't own that in the way that you used to own it. So you need to change, you fundamentally need to change your mindset in terms of how you think about, honestly, I think your role and responsibility, particularly when it comes to securing your kind of assets and your data. So I think that just requires, that's driving a significant change. And then that complexity of landscape allied with, and I mentioned it, the fact that, I think the crown jewels of most organizations is your data, could be anywhere, is anywhere, potentially, and everywhere. And guess what? That's what people are going after. I mean, and it's interesting in the context of this dialogue because they're going after it by targeting your identities and potentially your lack of or immature kind of processes and controls around identity and how it's used then to secure and I think, effectively manage access to data. So it's pretty simple. That stuff's big, it's complex. I don't think fundamentally we always have our arms around it. And that provides a massive attack surface that is only growing, or a threat surface. I think of it, honestly, that simplistically.
Yeah, no. So if, just in a few words, right, what advice, these folks are out here, they're living it too, right? And it's coming at them hard. Any simple advice for them in terms of strategy or how they should think about?
Well, you may have heard me mention it a couple of times, but I think, foundationally, you need to have a strong, robust identity fabric. And by identity fabric, I mean a set of identity services that are at the heart of your tech strategy. Like, they are the things that now drive, I think, all of the enablement that your tech strategy might be focused on. At the heart of that is identity. And if you don't have a strong identity fabric that looks at, honestly, like critical services that are important for maybe securing access, maybe understanding how you manage privilege, but then much more than that, how those things then affect the running of the technology which affects your business day to day. So for me, it's just, if you need to make sure that you focus on that and that you understand what the business needs and the impact and the influence you can have, because honestly, we're moving to a world where if we think about identity, we are at the heart of everything. There is nothing that no longer happens that isn't pivoted around identity. And I think the interesting thing, if we look at the future, is that's going to accelerate. So think about decentralized identity. It's a completely different paradigm. It's going to draw in different challenges, but for organizations, you still got to deal with it. If you don't have a strong and robust identity fabric and an identity framework that enables you to deal with those basic constructs, how are you going to plug some of these new paradigms in? That I think for me is super important. And then, as the world moves on and we look at things like self-sovereignty of data. Again, we just talked a little bit about data and the explosion of data and needing to understand where data is and how you manage, honestly, the appropriateness of use, but also the effectiveness of use. Yeah. Fast forward to decentralized identity models, we've got another thing we have to deal with. We can build to get there, but you have to have some of these foundational things in place. And for me, that's identity and data.
Yeah, that's good. So you had a chance to go through the Horizons 2.0, and I think we shared a little bit of back and forth on it, and when you get a chance to go through it, it talks a lot about a seamless experience, right, for the users, for the customers, business partners, right? But it's far easier said than done, right? How do you balance securing the business with not over securing the business so that you don't get some of the things needed for efficiencies and productivity, but you're secure as heck?
Well, and there's a key word you use, which is balance.
Right.
And balance becomes interesting when I think if you've pivoted your focus to have that identity fabric and identity at the center of everything you think about from a tech enablement perspective, then, well, there's a key kind of trigger in the word, right? Identity. Identity talks to every individual in the organization. And if you have that at your heart, then as you start to make decisions about what you want to do from a services perspective, you start to focus on, I think, you start to focus on how you enable different business outcomes, how you influence different business processes, not how you build tech to support doing something. So, for example, we are just about to complete a rollout of passwordless for 800,000 people. That was not a security play. That was a business enablement play because we knew that, guess what, all of those enterprise identities at the heart of running the Accenture business, if we could focus on how we remove the friction around passwords, yeah, obviously there's risk around passwords as well, but we could then look at and talk to the business about, well, what do we enable in terms of, I don't know, productivity? It's a great measure. Like we talk about how have we enabled everyone to do their job more efficiently and effectively. That's just helping the business go about doing its business. But it's so it's super simple, but it's a fundamental change in the way that we are positioning, honestly, like security products and services. So they are now at the heart of a lot of the business strategy because I am now needed to enable some of the things we want to do to be successful in a way that I was potentially an overhead 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, and we also talked about the idea that at the end of the day, regardless of the priority, regardless of how significant it is to mitigating risk and managing risk, it still comes down to dollars and cents, right?
Yeah.
Being able to maximize that ROI and gain efficiencies. And report, and I mentioned earlier that 70% of our companies only secure about 70% of their identities, right? How does that work?
But again, it just lacks a fundamental understanding, I think, of the impact you can have. So if you put an identity fabric at the core of your tech strategy and the core of enabling running your business, then, well, guess what, right? That makes you focus on, do I have all of those services covering all of the functions and activities, all of the humans, all of the non-humans, all of the transactions that are critical to running your business? The fact that, in that survey we see only potentially 70% is covered is just a wake-up call.
Yeah.
That we need to get better coverage. I choose the word fabric for a good reason because it needs to be ubiquitous and everywhere. It's a key building block to enabling, I think, successful running of your business. So you've got to get on and start to build out those services and build out your coverage.
Yeah. So I've got one more question, then I'm going to ask you to final thoughts. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, right? With all the recent focus on AI, and especially generative AI, what are some of the implications, right, from it? But also, what are some of the advances or advantages you're seeing?
And I guess I think of this in a couple of different ways. So I think of AI and Gen AI and the use of LLMs just honestly being the massive accelerator of the data security problem, because it's just a fast track to enabling the use of data. And in fact, interestingly, for organizations that say, hey, well, we're not really on our cloud journey yet, or we kind of are hesitant to go there, guess what Gen AI is about to do? It's just going to move everyone there like really quickly, because as soon as you start to consume those services, which you're going to have to, you've just stepped on that escalator and it's going at full speed. So it's just accelerated for me all of the things that I think are critical and important to helping your business and helping secure your business. So it just, honestly, it just re-emphasizes the need for that identity fabric and an understanding of what you're doing with your data. So I think that's definitely one thing that it's driving. The other thing I think it's doing is, it is going to play a critical part in all of the services. So actually, it's one of the reasons why we are cloud first and cloud native, because the only way to consume a lot of the benefits of AI and Gen AI is to be in the cloud, is to have those modern, agile, flexible services. I am super looking forward to the stuff that we're going to get as we move to identity in the cloud, because the flexibility it gives us, the insight, the ability to do things that I couldn't do before, partly powered by Gen AI, I have no hope of consuming that and using it as effectively as I need to if I'm not, if I'm not in that modern kind of environment and position.
Yeah, no, that's great. Got any parting thoughts for the audience?
And I'm sure I don't need to tell everyone this, given this group, but I mean, you have to double down on identity. It is the foundational thing for everything we're going to do, all of the challenges we need to meet, all of the enablement we need to perform over the next, well, I don't even know how long that period is. So, honestly, you have to focus on it. You have to make that a priority. And then I think tie that to your understanding of your use of data and what data means for your organization. If you can do those two things, I think you're going to be better placed to deal with what's coming in the not too distant future.
Very good. Hugely impressed with the fact that we did a pretty good job managing the clock.
Oh, right. We're there.
Look, I hope everybody appreciates the insight. He's got an incredibly challenging job at an incredibly dynamic organization, and I really appreciate you making time to come here with us today.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank
you,
much.
everyone.
Y'all hear me all right? All right, beautiful. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on really, I think, what's top of mind for many of you, which is how do we make an efficient, productive, and secure enterprise a reality? How are we thinking about the market today and our position to significantly evolve the market as a driver and a leader in this space? From a market standpoint, tomorrow, you're going to hear from our founder and CEO, Mark McLean, right? And he's going to talk to you about convergence. And I think we've been talking about convergence for the last year and a half, right? But you're going to hear about our flavor, SailPoint's flavor of convergence. And it's not the conventional version of convergence, right? The idea of bundling a large number of technologies as an efficiency buy, we believe there's a better way of doing it. If you think that's a legacy view on this entire idea of convergence. And what got you here will not get you there. Legacy convergence cannot address next generation identity security problems. Like it or not, change is happening. And in our world, that means a change in an identity population. If you listen to the analysts, it's about 15% CAGR a year. Changes of type of technologies and data that we got to use to manage our business. And as you heard Simon just say, getting to the cloud, right? Or getting to a SaaS solution. And all this change requires an accelerated approach to how you apply an identity lens to your security program. Today's reality means AI absolutely trumps convergence, right? And it is the key component to addressing next generation enterprise identity security changes. We've got a lot of challenges. How do you match the velocity of your business to ensure that your security controls are relevant? How do you deliver value, not just today, but tomorrow and continually as part of your approach to identity? How do you keep up with the business? And how do you ensure that your approach is not too light, not too deep, but just right? I know you're thinking you've heard that somewhere before. You did. It was with Goldilocks and the Three Bears. But it's exactly right. Right? You got to find the perfect match for your business and your security. With that, I'm going to move along to what I think many of you were waiting for, and that's the big reveal. I'm excited, I'm proud to announce today SailPoint's next generation unified SaaS platform, SailPoint Atlas. With Atlas, we are delivering the first generation of autonomous identity security. Atlas is scalable, Atlas is intelligent. Atlas is an extensible platform built to manage and secure access to critical data and applications. Atlas is designed with the flexibility and speed needed to grow and solve new identity security challenges without the need to re-architect or re-engineer the solution. This allows you to make it uniquely yours, right, with an upgradable, scalable way. At the platform for our security, SailPoint Identity Security Cloud Solutions, SailPoint Atlas is also built on machine learning. It's a unified, this is important, a unified data model with a set of common services, right? Common services, think workflows, forms, connectors, and these are what drives the intelligence needed to swiftly apply the right policies to access across entitlements to critical applications and data. This platform removes silos and unifies all the capabilities seamlessly together to build a modern identity security program from the ground up. Our vision for this market is built with the Atlas platform as the foundation and the real accelerant. We believe the next generation of identity has to deliver on the notion of just-in-time access, and it's got to be built on policy, not roles. With the just-in-time approach, we can provide a seamless identity experience for customers while delivering much more secure access to critical data. And we also believe that access must be viewed and managed holistically across all types of identities. It cannot be binary. And it's not just your regular users, right? But it's your privileged users as well. It's not just employee anymore. We're far beyond that. Non-employees capture upwards of 50% of the majority of today's identity population. Contractors, partners, third-party associates, and even service accounts. You add this to the depth of access to technology and essential business data, as I mentioned earlier, the only way to manage all of that at scale, you need automation, right? And it's enabled by AI and machine learning. So over the next few days, you're going to hear a lot more from my colleague Grady Summers here momentarily, and again tomorrow from Mark McLean. Change is surrounding your business. There is no doubt about it. The risk of inaction is far too great. I urge each of you to take action. Let identity be your accelerant, not your pain point. With that, let me welcome our next speaker, Grady Summers. He'll bring an in-depth view of our vision for this market and the innovation we have coming to our platform today. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for listening. Please welcome Grady Summers.